Welcome to the Commentary Magazine Daily Podcast. Today is Thursday, August 13th, 2026. I am John Podhoretz, the editor of Commentary Magazine, and I am going to ask you today, as I have failed to ask you, though properly I should, using appropriate podcast hygiene, to do some things that other podcast hosts will ask you to do. For example, please give us a 5-star review on iTunes. Please subscribe. Please like and subscribe on YouTube. That helps expose the podcast to more possible people in the evil algorithm. And the same thing is true of Apple. But I have been very loath to sort of play this game, but I need to play this game. You need to like and subscribe. You need to give us a 5-star review. You're here. You're an incredibly loyal audience. I'm incredibly grateful to you. Help me get us more exposure to more people who like you, who will want to listen by going to Apple Podcasts and giving us a 5-star review, or by liking and subscribing on YouTube. And with that, I will introduce our panel. Executive Editor Abe Greenwald. Hi, Abe.
Hi, John.
Senior Editor Seth Mandel. Hi, Seth.
Hi, John.
And the man who, in a previous incarnation, was really good about telling people to like and subscribe to the Commentary Podcast on YouTube, the Wall Street Journal Free Expression columnist and general AEI poobah, Matthew Continetti. Hi, Matt.
Hi, John. And let me just say I'm very proud of you for promoting the podcast and extolling our audience to like and subscribe, give the reviews, because that's how we reach more people.
We want to reach more people because, let's face it, we are living in a time of such unbelievable confusion and such muddiness that if we can provide some pathway to people achieving a teeny bit of clarity, at least about how they think about things, we will be doing an inestimable favor. For example, I listened this morning to, yes, Matt, my favorite early morning hate listen, up first from NPR, but they did a story that was very interesting from a liberal perspective, which is the results of the Tuesday primaries in and the primary in Michigan, whatever that was. It could have been 3 days ago. It feels like it was a month ago. Have not provided clarity about where the Democratic Party is on this insurgent effort to take the party from without by the Democratic Socialists of America, who, I remind you, are not actually members of the Democratic Party. Democratic Socialists of America is its own party. And, it's the leading figure in the insurgency in the United States for the last 10 years is Bernie Sanders, who is not explicitly or officially a Democrat. He is, in fact, an independent socialist. So this is actually an attack from the outside, not from the inside, from the base. And the question is, in these results where we've seen some progressives win, some DSA people win, and some lose, are the Democratic voters saying, you guys are pulling us too far? Or are these just kind of the hiccups on the path to the inevitable takeover of the Democratic Party by the ideology of the Democratic Socialists? And it can't be both, really. It has to be, you sort of in the end have to come down on one side or the other. Is the bite back that led to Francesca Hong losing the governor's nomination in Wisconsin, is that simply a hiccup because she was a problematic candidate? Or is it Democrats saying, you guys are going crazy, please don't do this, we want to defeat Trump and get the House and the Senate, and you're going to make it worse, and you're going to give Republicans new cover and blowback and all of that? Matt, where do you think we are in terms of that muddiness?
Well, it is absolutely muddy, and I think that part of the problem is the terminology we're using to describe these Democratic candidates. And this is, funnily enough, the subject of my column in the Free Expression tomorrow, which I just filed to the paper. I can't distinguish between a moderate, a progressive, and a socialist at times. And I'll just give you a few examples. Francesca Hong, she was a member of the Democratic Socialists of America. She, of course, is the anti-Thanksgiving candidate. She wanted to not just defund the police, but abolish prisons. she barely loses to David Crowley, and who the Milwaukee County executive, who is being described as a moderate. A word, by the way, that Crowley disavows. He doesn't want to be known as a moderate. And when he's described as part of the establishment, he has said that is a racial slur. That is an attack on his black identity for calling him a member of the establishment. And while Crowley doesn't have, it seems, Hong's extreme positions, Medicare for all, open border socialism, his current platform's extremely vague. When you go to visit his website, he said that he and Hong share the same goals. They just have different ways of getting there. And he was a strong supporter of the BLM protests in 2020. He has described America as a systemically racist country. He tried to get Colin Kaepernick, the former NFL quarterback who refused to stand for the Pledge of Allegiance, honored as part of Wisconsin's State Black History Month. And when Republican state lawmakers prevented that from happening, Crowley attacked their white privilege. So this is a moderate? I mean, it's a moderate in comparison to Hong, but what does that mean? And just go one state to the west, go to Minnesota. Peggy Flanagan, the lieutenant governor, won handily over Angie Craig, a congresswoman who is described as a moderate. Peggy Flanagan is described by the press as a progressive. But Peggy Flanagan supports Medicare for all. She wants to abolish ICE. She defames Israel regularly, saying falsely that it has committed genocide in Gaza. She refuses to take AIPAC money. Her positions are indistinguishable from Bernie Sanders and AOC, who endorsed her, but did not endorse Hong. So is Flanagan a progressive or a socialist? It seems to me that what's happening is socialism is being laundered into the Democratic Party under the guise of progressivism, just as this more government-centric, much more technocratic progressivism was laundered into the Democratic Party a generation ago. Instead of liberalism, it was called progressivism, right? So the problem with progress is that it's always progressing. And right now for the Democrats, it's continuing to progress in one direction, which is, I think, this socialist direction: larger government, less personal discipline and responsibility. And the terminology is less important than the actual positions these candidates hold. And we could talk about Abdul El-Sayed as well. Abdul El-Sayed is for Medicare for all. He wants to abolish ICE. He doesn't believe Israel should exist as a Jewish state, which that's beyond refusing AIPAC money, which of course he also does, and he campaigns more against AIPAC than it seems that he campaigned against Haley Stevens. And yet, when asked if he's a socialist, he says, "No, I'm just a capitalist who knows how the system works." Now, there's no denying the system is working for him. He and his wife reported a gross income of over $600,000 last year, and they own rental properties in Ann Arbor, Dubai, and Bangalore. But how do you figure a guy who calls himself a socialist, guy who calls himself a capitalist is called by the media a progressive and holds all socialist views? The answer is he's a socialist.
So you say the terminology doesn't matter, but I think it matters in this fundamental sense, which is that unless you went to college, I assume everybody here went to college, but unless you sort of studied the history of political philosophy now, given that we are 35 years out from the collapse of the Soviet Union, the actual specific meaning of the terms socialist, progressive, capitalist, democratic may be somewhat obscured to you, because while people understood what socialism was in the period in which there was a standoff or a face-off between the broadly speaking socialist world, which went from democratic socialism in countries like Scandinavia to totalitarian socialism in places like the Soviet Union and China, nonetheless had common features. Most common feature being government ownership of the means of production and a theory that the natural taxation rate in a socialist economy would be 100%, and that you then dial back to whatever level the government actually needs, and then you let people keep the rest. That's what socialism was, and it led to all kinds of, distortions and evils and all of that. And progressivism, which is an American term, American philosophy, is about the empowerment of an elite of experts and thinkers and more knowledgeable people who can run things for the self-governing citizenry that really doesn't know how to govern themselves at all. And so what you want to do is empower this world of elite experts, shield them from politics to the extent possible, so that they can work their will. That is sort of like if you want to sort of get to the derivation of the concept of the deep state, if you iterate it back 5 or 6 ways, you would get to the deep state believes it has the right to do things that politicians haven't authorized them to do, because ultimately, philosophically, the deep state is a progressive institution that is there to keep things going while the politicians are being foolish and silly and sucking up to people and all of that. But that is a technocrat, as you said, that's the technocracy. And the Clinton administration ended up blending what you might call old-fashioned liberalism with technocracy, or with progressivism, and inventing this unholy thing that then came to be called, now I don't think it was unholy, I think it was perfectly fine for the moment in some ways, but that then leftists started calling neoliberalism pejoratively. Liberalism used to be a positive word, then it became a negative word because no candidate ever wanted to run as a liberal, but right. Liberalism, okay, and now
progressivism is becoming, it's like progressivism is like this mediating term, because right. Some people still like it, other people don't like it, and so now, like I say, Flanagan is objectively a socialist. Right. I mean, her policies are endorsed by Bernie Sanders, yet she is a progressive, and I think that's the means by which socialism is being mainstreamed into the Democratic Party.
I feel as if progressivism has traveled this more specific journey, whereby it went from describing the kind of managerial class that would look after all affairs in a centralized way that John describes, to really being a culture war, social issues term. When people talk about being progressive now, I feel like they're talking about minorities making progress, whatever they deem to be minorities, or people on the fringes of the public square.
It's woke one, right? To use the term,
yeah, right. So what is progressive is
woke one stomping on your face forever.
So progressive, which used to mean, as I say, government by technology, a Wilsonian government by people who know how things work. Just like you hire an engineer to build a dam, you hire a social scientist to figure out how to run a social program. There isn't much distinction. But now, when we think of the word progressive, I think we probably think a good progressive believes in trans rights, believes that people born male should be able to play in women's sports if they want to identify as female. The sort of relations between the sexes should be completely egalitarian.
Transition surgeries for minors,
right? And that is not what progressivism was in its classic definition. It's now become a kind of catch-all term for being a forward-leaning Democrat who has moved beyond the nostrums and comforting views of the Clinton years, which are, of course, now a quarter century old.
And even Obama's first term, right? I mean, look at Obama's first term when he was against same-sex marriage.
Right.
Obamacare was the big deal. Cap and trade, that was progressive. That was Cass Sunstein trying to nudge us all into doing what the academics wanted us to do.
Right. But nudging, not forcing. Right. That was the
Right. Now,
right,
now we've progressed beyond that version of progressivism into essentially piecemeal adoption of the DSA platform.
right.
And I just want to add,
and the radical social platform that is seeking to undermine what I would describe as the, pre-political fundaments of civilization, redefining the most elemental fact of human existence, which is gender, which is the thing that happens around 6 weeks when the embryo or the zygote or whatever differentiates itself between, and expresses the XX and XY chromosomes. And that is now up for discussion. Like we're talking about an incredibly radical set of ideas that seeks to upend our understanding of what it means to be human. So in some ways, that progressivism is way more radical than the progressivism that a lot of us revile because it's top-down kind of authoritarian governance by the unelected. This is now using cultural power to redefine humanity. And so in some ways that's way worse.
Well, I also think it, like I say, I find all these terms confusing now. And I think it's also confusing the Democrats because look at Kamala Harris. She's the former vice president, the former presidential nominee of her party. She's ahead in the polls, still early, but she's ahead in the polls for 2028. And she's thinking that the new progressivism is socialistic. And so what has she done? She has been calling New York's mayor, Zoran Mamdani, trying to make friends with him. She's been calling the pro-Palestinian, pro-Hamas groups, trying to make friends with them. She endorsed Abdul al-Sayed in Michigan. And at the end of July, she gave this little notice speech where she said, you know what? It's time to consider. It's Kamala speak. So, of course, she doesn't take a definitive position. But for Kamala, saying we should consider something means that we should do something. She says we should consider abolishing the Electoral College, admitting Puerto Rico and the District of Columbia into the Union as states, and adding 4 seats to the Supreme Court. I wonder who would nominate the new justices. So she's moved to she believes that the left is now in the catbird seat in the Democratic Party. And so not only is she she's always been there on those more radical social issues, she's now adopting the DSA's, part of the DSA anyway, view of, structural change to our constitutional order. She's not going so far as to say, as some DSA members do, that we should abolish the Senate, but, give her a few weeks. And how long before she readopts Medicare for All, which was a policy she endorsed when she ran for president in 2020, but eventually had to disavow and drop before she dropped out of the race in December of 2019. And when that happens, so it's even more confusing because, is that she's not an outsider. You can't be more establishment than Kamala Harris. And yet she is adopting all of these far left views in a way that she thinks is going to get her a nomination, but I continue to believe won't go far at all with the general electorate.
I think Kamala is a fantastic weather vane figure here because, she has no core. So therefore, if the wind is blowing her, watching where the wind blows her will be very instructive. Yes. I mean, I'm not sure she's all that wise or canny about how she adopts these positions, even though, I mean, she's an entirely accidental major figure in the sense that had Biden not said, right, I will nominate a black woman
as my vice president.
Vice president, there's no way on earth the person who performed the way she performed in 2019 would have been nominated as the vice president in 2020. It was that
she's like Kalshi. We talked yesterday about how Kalshi was the reverse of what people see it as prediction, but really it's responding to the online hive mind. That's how to think of her. She's the betting markets.
Right. That is a very good way to put it. So if she is going DSA, you can kind of presume that that is the forward direction of the future. Now, Democrats are going through what the right went through. It's been going through it for 10 years anyway in its own set of systematic battles, I would say, beginning with George Zimmerman and Michael Brown on race matters during the Obama administration, which is where wokeness really, where the term wokeness sort of came into the common parlance.
And Black Lives Matter, right? I mean,
right,
that was
exactly.
2014.
Right.
And Ferguson.
Wokeness was an African American term about whether or not you had been awakened to the true sense of America
systemic
as
racism.
Systemic racist, right? So they've been going through it, but the Republican Party defining what is a conservative in 2026 is kind of just as hard as defining what it means to be a liberal or progressive or a socialist in 2026 in the Democratic Party. Like, I can say philosophically what I know what a conservative is, but whatever that is, it's not Trump. And Trump is the dominant figure in the Republican Party, and what he says goes, and 70 to 80% of Republicans will follow him wherever he goes. And half of what he's doing is, if it's not socialist, it's autarkic or mercantilist. He is making sure that government owns stocks in private companies, which is
to advance national power.
I think that
you have to include, when you include that phrase, then you see that it is a truly mercantilist worldview, right?
And
it's a little bit different from the socialist view, right?
Right.
He's not taking these stakes in these companies in order for, redistributing resources. Yeah. But he's doing it because he believes that it's necessary to reduce our dependence on China in this competition. He doesn't put it that way all the time because he just doesn't put things that way
clearly as you would like. Yeah.
But that's kind of the mindset that's leading to, I agree, mercantilism's the way to describe it.
Right. So that is the opposite of philosophical conservatism. That kind
American conservatism, anyway.
American conservatism. I mean, it's the opposite of the idea that a self-governing citizenry is in charge, and that the government that works best is the government that does the least. Now, that may be more libertarian than it is conservative, but the idea being that any right that is arrogated to authorities is a right that in some sense has been made conditional for ordinary people, that there are boundaries and gates put around that right that means it can go thus far and no farther.
Can I make a point here? Trump himself he no longer says he's conservative. He says he's common sense. That's what he's been doing now for the past really 6 years, really. So he doesn't say that he's an American conservative. He's Trump. He's common sense. And so that means that he just does what he wants to do. And we see that every day. And I do think the ultimate goal is to strengthen America in his view against the Chinese threat. But that's what he's pursuing. And this is happening a lot at the same time that we have this new phenomenon on the right of Nixon maxing, and the youth loving or trying to rehabilitate Richard Nixon's presidency. And they do this in a few ways. I mean, a lot of the ways they talk about reviving Nixon is by describing Watergate and Nixon's resignation as a kind of the result of a manipulative deep state plot to get the president, and so they draw a parallel. Right, they draw a parallel.
Which is absolutely accurate, but anyway,
right. Yeah. So they draw a parallel between that and what they see as deep state plots, certainly in Trump's first term, to undermine and to actually to nullify his election in 2016. But there's also another way in which some of the Nixon maxers are trying to recapitulate Nixon's presidency today, and that is that Nixon was not a conservative. Nixon employed conservatives. Nixon knew that conservatives were part of his electoral coalition, but he was not a conservative. And so he was what the Trumpers would call common sense, right? Back then, which was extremely pragmatic, open to liberal proposals. In some ways, I think David Frum makes this point in his great history of the 70s. Nixon was the most liberal president ever. When you think about,
I think unquestionably, what did
right.
Nixon
So
do?
affirmative action,
affirmative action. He created
the
OSHA.
EPA.
He created the EPA. He imposed wage and price controls on the American economy. He had the federal government controlling the wage structure in the United States. Imagine a world after Nixon in which any Democratic politician did a third of what Nixon did, and the Republican Party would have gone to town, taking them down and making them unelectable. But that was
Nixon was also like the father of the national parks as we know it today. He was like he's vacuumed up land into the public into the government trust and made it national parks.
So this confusion, you're absolutely right. The confusion is on both sides.
Right.
On the left, I think that the trend is more dominant and also more kind of in line with the evolution of the American left over the past century, which is that, again, because progress has no foundation in the constitutional order, right? Because progressives see the Constitution not as the foundation of our government, but actually as an obstacle to what they want to achieve, all the good things they want to achieve, they have no base, so they're continually just moving along. Well, what's more progressive? What's more progressive? On the right, it's this long-standing, I think, argument over principle and politics, with Nixon being the, kind of the epigony of the politician. But Trump adds the other dimension, of course, which is his, he's not Richard Nixon. Richard Nixon was a brilliant, possibly one of the smartest presidents we ever had. A very, all of the manipulation, all of the demons that haunted Nick, they were all internalized. Whereas, of course, with Trump, they're in our face, 24 hours a day for now 10 years.
Yeah, well, Nixon wanted president. Yeah, go ahead. There, sorry.
I just was, I don't want to skip over the real battle though on the right along these lines. I mean, the line between conservative and what they're calling common sense is being contested pretty aggressively. If you use the word conservative now, if Trump were to, it's risky. It's risky because there is this idea that conservatives believe in the market destroying the common man. It's a populist problem with conservatism now. They're happy to be conservative on some social issues, but when you get to deeper stuff,
And you're absolutely right, Abe. And I should just add, of course, Nixon was an internationalist and believed in American global leadership and obviously believed in the use of American power in his escalate to de-escalate strategy in Vietnam. So he was not what you see in the current isolationists, of course. And though Nixon personally, we know from the tapes, did not have high opinion of Jews, he also saved the state of Israel. And so his commitment to Israel in 1973 was critical. And so that's a difference than some of the people who are trying to rehabilitate Nixon today, who are much more isolationist. They're not internationalists at all. And of course, they oppose Israel and want us to cut off Israel. So that's a difference that needs to be acknowledged as well.
So what we have here is, part of the reason that progressivism or liberalism has gone ever more into sort of the fever swamps. The way in which everything harmonizes over time is that, one of the original socialist progressive thinkers was an actual walking, talking lunatic named Charles Fourier, and his lunacy, which had to do with how to structure the planet so that it was more justly and resources were more justly distributed top down in the 1820s and 1830s. He believed that should his program be put into practice, the oceans would turn into lemonade, and then you could drink from the ocean, a delightful summer beverage. This was not metaphoric. He believed that this would have such an astounding effect on the natural world that it would alchemize the oceans itself. Why do I bring this up? Because the last 30 or 40 years of progressivism is a story of what appears to us to be great success. Gay marriage, maybe being the highlight. One reversal, as far as I can tell, really, in this entire 50, 60-year period, which is that the Dobbs decision overturned the unlimited right to abortion, or made unconstitutional federal rules on abortion. But mostly we've had a journey in this one direction. But they don't feel as though they've won anything, because the capitalist system, or the free market, or whatever American version of the free market there is, still prevails. There are still winners and losers. There are still people who invent things and then make $100 billion. And there are still people who are, who have what they believe to be excess political power that they don't deserve. And there are still racial disparities in achievement and all of that. And they feel, we look at them and we say, you have had an unbelievable success in transforming American life. And they look at their success and they say, we haven't gotten anywhere yet, because there are still billionaires. And according to Bernie Sanders, there should not be billionaires. A system that empowers the public to do as well as it can possibly do, because government has no right to expropriate what they make through the sweat of their own labors or the work of their own, intellectual capacities. That's a world that they want to live in. They want to live in that world, and the world that we live in is a world in which Elon Musk has $500 billion and Larry Ellison has $400 billion, and that alone discredits everything. So they don't think that progressivism has worked, or progressivism as it is understood by us works. And so they are getting more and more radical. They don't, and the fact that Trump has won 2 of the last 3 elections is to them evidence that they failed, that the failure was a result of cowardice in advancing the opinions and positions that could save America from the depredations of capitalism and America-centric ideas, and America first is not America first, but like internationalism as we're talking about it. And so they think they're a failure. We think we're fighting a rearguard action against them, but they don't think that we're fighting a rearguard action against them.
Well, they also learned from Trump to be a wrecking ball.
Huh?
They also learned from Trump to be a wrecking ball, which is like they Trump says the working class needs this or working people need that, and he just sort of rammed through whatever barriers were there. They take from that you can use general terms and sort of apply them in that way. I think that's part of the norms breaking and all that stuff too. To them is they actually want to follow Trump, both in parts of his rhetoric and in the way that he carries it out.
If we think about woke one, to go back to AOC's coinage, that emerged, like we said, in Obama's second term. And I think that was a response to Obama's failure, because Obama was going to provide universal health care. He was going to bring the country together, and he was going to have a post-racial presidency. Those were kind of the 3 big claims of Obama. And none of them were achieved. Obamacare was a mess and continues to be a mess. The country became more polarized, different explanations for that, then less. And the post-racial presidency never arrived. And in fact, by the end of Obama's term, racial tensions were getting worse in this country, not better. So on those counts, he failed. But then the larger progressive project, I think, has been on its back foot. I think about the results of those 2 out of 3 elections that Trump won. Not only do we have the Supreme Court changed in a conservative, actual principled American conservative direction, but we in the second term, the wrecking ball that Seth describes, Trump is deconstructing the DEI apparatus that has been part of this, that Nixon, as we just said, helped to implement when he was president. LBJ started with LBJ, Nixon, every other president. No one else touched it before Trump. They haven't been able to raise tax rates to the degree that they wish to on the rich. Now that they're classic socialists, of course, raise taxes on everyone in order to pay for the welfare state. These socialists, they're fascinated. They want to make our system even more progressive because they know that no American will vote for middle class tax increases, right? And so the threshold, it used to be even, we won't raise taxes above people making more than $400,000. Now it's the millionaires tax, or there shouldn't be billionaires, or the pied-à-terre. It's trying to, even though the pied-à-terre tax, of course, scooped up people randomly, it seems. They have to work within the constraints of the American political system. Guns, Second Amendment, still very popular. You mentioned abortion rights. If I'm a progressive, a young progressive, I almost feel like I would almost feel like those the kids on the right who say, "Well, what has conservatism ever conserved?" I would say, "Well, what has progressivism ever? What progress has it achieved?" And of course, if you're in your 20s, you really have lived in a world where same-sex marriage was the norm. So even there, the progress hasn't worked. And on the trans front, which was supposed to be the next battlefield, of course, that's an issue they lose on. Right. Precisely because, as you say, John, it cuts to the actual, the very core of human nature.
I mean, I think structurally, the American government is structured to defeat progressivism because it's hard to pass legislation, but by design. So making changes and fiddling around with things is not how our system is supposed to work. It's now gotten to the point where it's so difficult that we're not even writing legislation at all because it's so hard. But if you live, but it was necessary for the project of post-war left liberalism that there be a branch of the government that would do its bidding when the elected officials could not. Right? And there were 2 such things. One was the administrative state, the people who work permanently in government who do most of the spade work. And if they could be convinced, if people went into the long march through the institutions, if people working there could be convinced to be exponents of a certain ideology, decisions could be made, things could be inched in directions that are more favorable to leftist ideas than right-wing ideas. That's one. And the other was, of course, the judiciary. And this is where Trump's election, really just the first term, was so revolutionary because by transforming the Supreme Court into a steady 5-4, let's say, implicit conservative majority, the 70-year tradition of liberals getting things to the Supreme Court in hopes that the decisions that have not been made by the legislature or that have been made by the legislature that they don't like can be overturned willy-nilly by a declaration that there is a right to something that they can adduce in the Constitution, like the right to abortion or the right to gay marriage. No one else in previous eras would ever have seen in the Constitution. And then that was taken away from them. 3 Supreme Court nominations, and the Supreme Court, at least, is no longer their final stop for help, for the Hail Mary play. And Trump being president for now 6 of the last 10 years has, of course, put his stamp on the rest of the federal judiciary. And he'll have another 2 years. And I don't know what the number, it's always hard to know these numbers, but in the end, the longer you serve as president, the more each presidency seems to transform the federal judiciary. So that it goes right wing after 8 years of a Republican president like Bush, and then it goes left wing after 8 years of a Democratic president like Obama. And there are going to be essentially 8 years of Trump. And so the federal judiciary as a whole will have moved to the right. And that really does make the liberal leftist project way more difficult to achieve, because while people in my city, Abe's in my city and in Washington and all that, may be living on the fringes almost of the left, that is not the nature of the American people as a whole. And every institution that reflects that is something that the Democratic Socialists want to overhaul, change, or get rid of. That's why they want to abolish the Senate, because the idea is the Senate is not one man, one vote. It's not egalitarian because every state gets 2 senators. That means a state with 600,000 people has the same number of senators as a state with 38 million people. That can't be fair in our system. If you say to them, that's precisely the point. The point was to have a one man, one vote system in the House, and to have something that was not governed by that same populist force as a legislative check on the lower body, and then the president is voted by everybody at once. And then there's this other body with lifetime tenure that gets to call the balls and strikes. And all of that gums up the works, and they don't want the works gummed up. And any gumming up of the works is to them a failure in their project.
This gets to something that I've been thinking about. Yesterday I wrote about, excuse me, the AOC's comment about woke 1 was crazy. And I said, well, woke 1 was crazy, but woke 2 is this sort of, if we're going to call it that, socialist Islamist push. And it's worse than crazy. It's evil. And then something I thought about afterward that I wish I'd included in there, but I wasn't really thinking about it at the time, is that, and it gets to what you're talking about, John, is that woke 1, if we look back, if we talk about defund the police, trans rights, DEI, whatever these movements were, however damaging they were, they arose out of a kernels that are fundamentally American, having to do with our original sin of slavery, our anti-authoritarianism. You could sort of channel that into the anti-police thing, are seeking ever greater individual liberties. You could say that the trans push is a sort of a warped version of that. Woke 2 is entirely foreign. This is I think the chilling aspect of this. Woke 2 is not about individual liberties. It has nothing to do with our racial makeup, our ethnic. It's not. It is about destroying institutions the way a foreign socialist leader would look at these institutions. It is about supporting terrorism of a sort that has absolutely no basis in American soil.
It's anti-Semitic, right? Which is the key here. Yeah. And it's so funny you say that. Among my summer reading was William F. Buckley's book on the UN, United Nations Journal, which takes up the couple months he spent in 1973 as a delegate to the UN General Assembly. And reading it and reading about the arguments of the General Assembly, all of which, that those the third world powers which would take direction from the Arabs. The way he describes it is the recently decolonized African states took direction from the Arab states, which took direction from the Soviet Union. And the entirety of the General Assembly animus was directed at two countries at that time. One was South Africa, and the other was Israel. Of course, since 1989, it's no longer directed at South Africa because of the end of apartheid. So since 1989, the UN General Assembly's animus has been directed entirely at the state of Israel. And what's happening to the United States House of Representatives? With the growth of the Squad, these folks talk like they're delegates to the UN General Assembly. So
that is such a good observation.
The foreignness that you're talking about, it is absolutely true. But I do think there's a
Mamdani too with the international law.
It's exactly it is
international
the UN
law ICC.
It is the UN imported into the United States House of Representatives. And why on earth any American would want our House of Representatives to resemble the UN General Assembly is an eternal mystery to me. And this is why I think there is a limit on it. And I just want to bring this home to the results in New York last year and Michigan last week. Both Mamdani and El Sayed won their respective contests because of block voting, because they could count on tremendous upward of 90% support among ethnic blocs. It was the South Asian migrant community and Muslim community in New York City for Zoran, and it was the Arab and Muslim community in Michigan. This is the difference between El Sayed's win and Francesca Hong's loss. Hong did not have that ethnic base of support. And while it's going to be it's why we can't dismiss El Sayed in a general election, by the way, because he has its support. It also means that type of candidate doesn't really translate to other contexts if that ethnic block voting isn't there.
Thinking about your point about the UNization of the American left inside the Congress, it occurs to me that this is, I talked before about this, the Hail Mary, the backstop, the effort to have a force that can override the sort of expression of Republican will. I don't mean Republican Party will. I mean, as America is a republic, the expression of the views of the electorate through our Republican system by completely taking it external. That is, you talk about international law, which does not exist. I mean, there are treaties. So the treaties are things that are signed and that are basically somehow supposed to be enforced by, basically war if you violate a treaty. But international law is a philosophical construct. It does not really exist. And the court that was created to implement international law is a construct. It has no enforcement powers. It has to use local authorities that sign on to it to enforce by arresting people if it does arrest people and all of that. And here what does the American left love to invoke? International law. Mamdani wants to arrest Bibi Netanyahu on charges not involving any American court, but on charges that were levied against him by the International Criminal Court, to which the United States is not a signatory and does not accept its authority. But Mamdani does, and the left does, and they like it for that. They like it for climate change. They like the Treaty of Paris. They like all of these efforts to restrain, control, and guide American power that come from the outside. And that, to make Abe's point, aside from all the other stuff that is now un-American, like supporting terrorists, accepting that terrorism is a perfectly acceptable way to express politics by other means. That's new. That is very anti-American. I mean, it is fundamentally anti-American to say that we, the ultimate arbiter of our own destinies, are ourselves, and double time that the reason that the ultimate arbiter of our destinies is ourselves is because our rights are given by God. So A, they don't like the rights being given by God, and B, they don't like the idea that that the American people are their own last backstop. Having lost their institutional backstop, at least for a moment, it could be that a Democrat wins in 29 and 4 Supreme Court justices on the right have heart attacks and they control the Senate, and then they get 4 justices and everything just flips the other way. I mean, that's not, Alito's in his 70s, Roberts is 70, Thomas is in his 70s, people get sick, whatever, this could all turn in 5 years. But they don't like our system. They are fundamentally opposed to our system, but they're no longer playing the game where they stay outside the system as gadflies shooting from outside. They have made the very brilliant tactical decision to move in, to go in, get yourself elected to a local something, establish your writ, get your community support, rise up to another position, either appointed or elected.
It's the Bernie Sanders path.
No, but it's the Mamdani path.
Well, that too, but Bernie Sanders, remember, wasn't a Democrat until fairly recently. He waited till the end of his career to be like an actual.
He's still not a Democrat.
He's still not a Democrat. Oh, I thought he had to register to run for president. So that's the model of somebody having their own power base, or some sort of ideological power base, maybe is a better term for it. But Bernie Sanders was also weirdly an institutionalist, and his disciples are not, right? Bernie Sanders could have been a sort of, early in his career, Ted Cruz would do things like shut down the government over, various fights and stuff in the budget. Bernie Sanders could have been that of the left and chose not to. He never took it to the point where he would torpedo Democratic legislation and things like that, because he was a sort of institutionalist even outside the institution. But Bernie's children are Leninists. They are burn it all downists. And by the way, I also think that this is just in terms of that UN thing, just how far the Democratic Party itself has changed. Because remember, in 2004, John Kerry had to backtrack and explain for days when he made the comment about the U.S. policy needing to pass a global test. That was seen as a fumble, as a real goof up. And he went on all the news shows and he was asked about it by mainstream anchors. Like, what is this? The extent to which that has changed is that now the global test is the first test. That's the litmus test. Is the global test now, and that's how much the party itself has changed, what it will allow, in terms of American sovereignty.
Right. So every conversation that we have about where the Republican Party is under Trump, moving back over to the other side, every conversation here fundamentally is about what happens when he goes. He's still there. He distorts everything. We don't understand who's going to win what primary based on whether he comes in and makes someone win, or are there cases in which he is in fact having a negative impact in some districts, even in Republican districts, in the primary system. And then there are going to be elections, and we'll see what role he plays in them and all this. And then in 2029, he will be gone. And all of the philosophical conversations we are having in some sense for the future. What is the right going to be when this cult of personality goes into retirement, even if it still has vestiges of its effect when he is 83 years old outside of government and he can still fiddle bitch around with things? And that's where defining conservatism starts getting into the weeds, the way defining progressivism, socialism, and liberalism are now. Because as Abe says, there are parts of the leftist agenda that do dovetail with certain ideas on the right. For example, abolishing ICE, there are two ways of looking at law enforcement on the right, one of which is conservatism, as understood Burkean conservatism, is about order and societies having order, and we all agree to come under a system that maintains order and safety and keeps things regular so that people can live normal lives. And then there is, we are all individuals, we are independent, we are sovereign unto ourselves, and these forces that we empower to have a monopoly on violence and things like that are fundamentally problematic, if not illegal. So if you want to abolish ICE, there's a whole bunch of libertarians over here who don't have the slightest problem with abolishing ICE. Why does the federal government have a police force? It shouldn't have a police force.
When you say whole bunch, we might want to reduce that number.
Okay. I mean, it's a radical view.
I mean, there are libertarians who want to do it,
right. but in
there aren't many.
Right. Okay. But in populist terms, there have been these moments, explosive moments in the last 35 years where ordinary Americans come up in front of sort of like a federal leviathan, and that becomes a populist rallying cry. Ruby Ridge and David Koresh's compound, and that standoff at the farm
Nevada.
Idaho. I can't remember. Anyway, but there are these moments. Yeah, there are these moments when sort of like the federal government says, "Okay, that's enough of you."
Anti-federal government, yes.
Yeah,
that sentiment.
Right. That's enough of you. Now, law and order is still, I think, overwhelmingly where the right is on matters of social disorder and decay. But it isn't un-American, as the Gadsden flag and Don't Tread on Me and stuff like that, dating back to the first 10 years of the Republic, would indicate, to be questioning of the existence of
suspicion of centralized power is a part of the American DNA.
Right. And so in a weird way, when they talk about abolishing ICE, they're evoking very early American libertarian thinking,
in a way,
about these things. And so there is that's where the horseshoe.
But there won't be a single Republican candidate in 2028 who wants to move off President Trump's immigration policy. I mean, they might say I want to do it slightly differently, but I just think that's you're right. Populism, I guess my take from what you're saying is populism is confusing all these categories.
Right.
And it makes strange bedfellows, and there's certain flavors of libertarianism that have been on the right for many years that now might have more in common with the abolish ICE left. I mean, we saw this a little bit with criminal justice reform in Trump's first term, where there is like a libertarian support for a Trump initiative, which was very unusual. But of course, also, it's not just Trump who's affecting these debates, but it's also the memory of the Biden years on the right that will affect these debates as well. And so that it's like we experienced essentially an open borders policy under Biden. No one on the right wants to go back to that.
Right. But I would say that if we talk about the horseshoe, the famous idea of the horseshoe, where the far right and the far left, it's not a circle, it's a horseshoe, because they don't quite touch, but they start coming really congruent to each other. So as I say, some of this is suspicion of the federal.
Tucker Carlson and Hunter Biden are now actually.
Well, that's a very good example. But I mean, suspicion of the federal government for being either the tool of the deep state in controlling and containing things, that's the right, or being the vehicle by which white supremacy and the wealthy control everybody else, that's the left. What are those two views? What brings the people who hold those very radical views together at the tip of the horseshoe now? Something that you wouldn't expect, given what we're talking about here, and that is anti-Semitism.
Yeah.
It's Jews. Where do you come to Jews from this? From this congruence?
Well, I think when you get to the Jews, it is a circle. I mean, I think they are right there with one another.
Okay,
I mean, it's the other part of the horseshoe is the foreign policy horseshoe, right? Which is again, libertarians extremely suspicious of American power, because power the use of American power expands the federal government, which in their view limits individual liberty. The left, very suspicious of American power because American power has been viewed as a counter-revolutionary force. And so America's alliance with Israel and defense of Israel is seen as the worst expression of American power by both the libertarians and the left.
And of course, the fact that you have this small population that punches above its weight, Jews in America punch above their weight, and to both sides of the populist coin, that's got to be the result of a trick or a conspiracy.
Yeah,
because
because
they're the ultimate scapegoat, and it's a zero-sum game. So if Jews have the power, they've taken it away from somebody else, and they didn't have a right to, because there aren't enough of them, and therefore they are manipulating things behind the scenes, and that is anti-Semitism from the medieval times to the present, empowering the disempowered, the most disempowered people on earth, and empowering them with mystical, magical, evil powers to control the 99% of the population that actually has power over things. And that's why this is a unique moment of threat to the Jews, because it would be one thing if the entirety of the Republican Party or the entirety of the right were saying, okay, this is it. This is disgusting. We have your back, Jews, but they're not. They don't. They mostly do. 80% of them do. And the administration that they mostly support, although now, of course, Tucker is now an enemy of the Trump administration, and I think largely on the Jewish question, they would, the Trump administration is a philo-Semitic. It has a settler supporting ambassador. It has two settler supporting ambassadors to Israel in the form of David Friedman and Mike Huckabee. It is enforcing Title VI on college campuses to support the civil rights of Jews against these administrators. Harmeet Dillon at the Civil Rights Division of the Justice Department is going after hate crimes against Jews and rules against Jews, even though conservatives are very suspicious of hate crime legislation. So that is what's happening there. And so there you also have an incentive for anti-Semitism, because on the one hand, the far left hates Trump more than it hates anything, and anything he does is by definition evil or he's up to no good and is doing something secretive. And then you have the right that is now turning on Trump or has turned on Trump that doesn't like him because he's being too nice to this, evil cabal of people who, and in the end, of course, aren't Christian also. So, that's bad. That's bad too. So you have a kind of aggressively secular offense against, that Jews present, and then you have an aggressively religious
right.
problem.
Well, that's true in the politics too, right? You often hear people say throughout history sometimes the Jews have been accused of being socialist revolutionaries, and sometimes the Jews have been blamed for capitalist excesses. Well, congratulations, you have both now. That's what the polarized environment does. That's what the rise of the far left and its reflection in the right has, because now you can actually have both of those complaints at the same time. Oh, the socialists are rising, must be a bunch of Jews in the DSA, blah, 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 can now be said by certain portions of the right, even though at the moment what's clearly happening is the Democratic Party's institutions making the Jews unwelcome. But you have those two versions of the political scapegoats are coexisting at the same time.
I would just posit this for you guys. If the Democratic Party were more normie, if the Democratic Party could run in 2026 the way Biden ran in 2020, it would, on the one hand, you would think it would win these midterms in an incredibly decisive manner comparable to 1994, 2010, or 2014 for the Republicans, because they would simply be the not Trump. Trump's in his 30s. Republicans are in bad odor. They could just, win every seat that might be up for grabs. but they can't, they won't, and it's going to be a muddier prospect because they've gone so radical. On the other hand, the Biden party, the Biden part of the party, the Biden Klobuchar, normie part of the party, Janet Mills running as the senatorial candidate from Maine as opposed to Graham Plattner, has no juice. It's got nothing to drag those people, Democrats, out to the polls, aside from hatred of Trump. Nothing. They have nothing to offer. They don't have a vision. They promise. They have nothing to promise. They talk platitudes and tiny incremental changes. And if you're particularly a young Democrat or a person on the left, you need more from your political movement than they can possibly give. And so maybe if the normies won all these elections, it wouldn't be a slam dunk for them because people between the ages of 18 and 34 would stay home, because it's like, I'm not getting any vibe from these guys that they are going to change things in a way that I think America needs to be changed. So we're in this very weird place where on the one hand, the Democrats need this enthusiasm from the DSA types. And on the other hand, it's very self-destructive, or it can be very destructive. And I guess we're only going to know in November which part of that, which side ended up being more potent, that they were too threatening to be given power by electorates and states and districts, or that they were so much more exciting and the current status quo under Trump is so dissatisfying that it's time to throw all the cards in the air and see what they can do. Matt, you have a recommendation.
I do. Thanks, John. So like I said, I've been traveling this summer, been doing a lot of reading. Mentioned the Buckley book on UN Journal, Delegates Odyssey, but that's not my recommendation, even though it's a very good book. But my official recommendation for Thursday, August 13th, 2026 is a book called No Middle Name by Lee Child. No Middle Name is a collection of all of Lee Child's Jack Reacher's stories. So, of course, Jack Reacher, very well-known fictional character, the former Army military policeman who wanders the country, getting into thrilling adventures. The main character, the protagonist in a series of, I think, something like at least 20, maybe 30 novels now. At the same time, his creator, Lee Child, also wrote a few novellas and short stories that are collected under this title, No Middle Name. I picked it up at a bookstore in Lake Placid, New York, and I couldn't put it down. It's just a fantastic way not only to enjoy Reacher adventures if you're already a fan, as I was, but I also think it'd make a great introduction to the Jack Reacher series if you're interested. And so that's why I'd recommend No Middle Name by Lee Child.
An interesting week to do this, by the way, because I believe the fourth season.
Yes, I hear the new season.
The Amazon Prime version of Reacher is on, and it's not a great show. Like I'm not really not a great show, except for the casting of Alan Ritchson as Reacher. They found a kind of like a guy they could have cloned in a lab from the description of Reacher in the book to play Reacher. He's like 6'4". His shoulders are as wide as South Dakota. He is impassive and tough and dryly witty. And it's a kind of inspired performance, particularly given the insane miscasting of Tom Cruise as Reacher in two Reacher movies in the 2010s, since the whole thing about Reacher that made him a particular special character in the world of these kinds of books is that he is a mountain of a man and an almost uninjurable, sort of semi-Superman figure. And of course, there's Tom Cruise, who's 4'8" or something, beating up people who are twice his size unconvincingly.
But Tom Cruise can run and jump in space.
He can, but Reacher doesn't run.
Can do that.
Reacher doesn't
hates
run.
running.
He walks impassively toward you and then punches your head off of your
Before you
spine.
have time to react.
Yeah, exactly. So
He always initiates.
Anyway, so I keep hoping that they'll pull it together, and the next season of Reacher. It is true, actually, each season of Reacher has been better than the previous season. So maybe this one. They will
Actually,
finally
it's
get
funny
right.
you mentioned this. It's almost the novels and the short stories. The writing is so good. It's actually hard to kind of visualize it, maybe, no matter who you cast. And even my mental image of Reacher is not Alan
Richardson.
Yeah, whatever.
Yeah.
I actually think he's too big. So it's like you need like there's like a Goldilocks in your head as you're picturing. And Child is such a visual writer too. It's all taking place in your mind that I think it's harder to kind of put on screen. And so I recommend the books. If anyone who wants a thrill ride, just pick up a rant. You can read. I read them in no particular order.
They aren't in any order because he is literally the Lone Ranger. He just rides into a new town, has a new adventure, and then leaves town. I
would avoid the more recent ones. Lee Child now co-writes with his son, I believe, Andrew Child, and those are less impressive. Stick with Lee Child's originals,
solo byline,
his solo byline, including in this short story collection, which is just wonderful.
Okay, well, Matt, thanks for joining, and for Abe and Seth, I'm John Podhoretz. Keep the candle burning.